Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your midwife, teacher, and host for this podcast. Together, you and I are going to navigate the interior life. And we're going to do that by unearthing our personal truths, our own insight, and our inner knowing. These are weekly teachings that are brought to you by hard-nosed scientific evidence focused on spiritual direction with integrity and self-awareness. In 2 words, this is your inner work. Hello, lovelies. I am super excited today. Always excited when I talk to you, but today I have Nancy Guerrera from Goddess of the Road with me on the phone or on the line or in your ear, however it is that you're listening to us. And we just had some pre-recording conversation, and she said, I don't know what the format is and how this is going to work. I just joined, and I just was giggling at how sometimes we have to approach life that way. You know, we'll just see what happens and go with the flow. So welcome, Nancy, to the Turning Inward podcast.
Hi, thank you.
You're welcome.
It is a delight and a pleasure to be here talking with you. For real. I adore you.
Aw, thank you so much. Well, you know, I invited you to the podcast because you and I had a delicious, like a super juicy conversation last week. And I just wanted to share it with my lovelies, with the folks, with the peeps, and folks that are interested. And our conversation last week, more than likely, like 99% is going to be what we talk about this week, but just the idea of what we touch base on is kind of what I wanted to revisit. And what I remember is that you helped me sort of walk through the journey of the distinction between spirituality, religion, and what my experience within my tradition was and how that can be different for folks. And you and I work in a way that is mystical, right? It's not what is seen with the eye. It's what's felt with the heart or intuited, you know, maybe sensed with our body. Just, it's more of what's under the surface. And sometimes that can feel scary. And I think the question that spurred our conversation is when you said, do you talk about being Catholic in your teachings? And I was kind of taken aback because I'm like, no, I've never mentioned it that I can remember. Or I kind of stay away from it as sort of I'm not a religious scholar, right? I don't have the expertise to talk about it. But then as you and I talked more, I came to a different insight. One of the things I mentioned when we were talking before is the idea of metanoia.
Yes.
And it's interesting because the journey that I've been going through spiritually over the last, I don't know, long time, right? Since I used to walk to church with my cousin Abby, going to Santa Rosa in Pecos, Texas, until now is just sort of this new stage of growth. Like maybe I've gone from being a teenager into young adulthood in my spirituality. So I recognized or realized that metanoia is the Greek origination of Jesus' first teaching. And it is literally changing your mind. But it's caused a lot of confusion because it's translated into repent in English. And that's not really what metanoia is. And so I've gone back to like the original teachings, the perennial philosophy, and been really comforted by the idea that softening our hearts and changing our minds is really kind of the work that we have to do in the world. You know, the death of the old into a new birth. And I think we go through new births like 5 or 6 times in our lifetime. So
Yeah, at least.
I hope.
I think I'm on my 19th life sometimes.
Yeah. So you're officially older than me.
I am. Well, I am probably in real life too, but
Oh, I've got lots of canas. Canas is Spanish for white hair. So when I was younger, I used to want to be old all the time because I look young. And so now I'm very sort of proud of all the silver that I've grown into.
mm.
But what do you recall from our conversation that was juicy? That was sort of my perspective.
Well, it's funny, it's interesting. So kind of revisiting this and talking about it again, it brings up a few things to mind, but like what I actually got really curious about right there was when you said, you were little and you wanted to be old.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think I kind of experienced that too, and I wondered, and don't worry, I'm going to relate this to the metanoia.
No, do you? You
but,
are just so beautiful, do
but
you?
I thought about that for a second, and what kind of like flashed into my mind was this idea of like wanting or needing to be taken seriously.
Hmm.
And I think, for me, in some ways, that is sort of, evolved into being like really being right and knowing what you're saying and having really, clear thoughts and opinions and kind of, it ends up really sort of being sort of mastery in the realm of the mind in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of brings me back to that idea too of the connection and disconnection between that and the heart, because I think there's all kinds of stuff that I learned, through cultural conditioning, familial conditioning, all that stuff that ultimately kind of ends up sort of making us like prize thought and what's in the mind, and it can totally take us out of our heart and heart living and relating and having that kind of, human connection and stuff. So what I recall and kind of found really interesting in our conversation too, and I explore this like a little bit for myself, but I'm more of a like I was raised in a Catholic church myself, but didn't identify with it much, and then as an adult, didn't continue to practice it as a faith. But what I was really curious for you, because you explore both spirituality so deeply and have a connection to your religion and faith, like, kind of what you saw or see or feel as the differences, and like where and how you relate to them similarly or differently. Like that's what kind of fascinates me about where you're coming from with this, that is different than how I relate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And so I just want to recognize that this anxiety pulled up in my body because
Mm,
for so long there was this tension around, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing something against my faith? Because I was exploring mysticism and yoga and vipassana meditation and all these things, and everyone, not the collective everyone, right? But
mm-hmm,
the feedback that I received is, are you not Catholic anymore? And our Catholic belief believes this and that and the other. And I would just accept that, and then I would dive deeper into, what does our faith teach us? What does our tradition say? And that's actually what led me to, it might be considered the outer edge, but definitely still within the tradition, within the
mm-hmm,
historical sort of roots of our tradition, not exactly what you said, which is the cultural conditioning, the growing up and unintentionally thinking that Jesus or God had a white beard and lives in the clouds kind of
mm-hmm,
thinking. And there was this pull between belonging somewhere and not wanting to not fit in. And like you said, going to, I think the uniqueness of everything. There's and I don't know where it originates from, but there's a scripture that says, if they're not, where the apostles are telling Jesus, look, he's doing work, your work, let's go stop him. And Jesus says, no, like anyone that's not against us is for us. Like we're all doing the same work. And I think that's what I love about going to the roots of Catholicism, is that there is a wisdom that is truth in all religions across all time. And that's kind of where I focus, not so much on the upper levels of, that current conditioning that we can fall into. And that's what gives me peace and makes me feel truth and freedom. So, but it's tough to let go of that learning. And I've read before that that's actually what this shift of heart, shift of mind, changing of mind, opening of heart is. It's letting go of an old way of thinking. It's that death and rebirth. And that's just not how, it's not easy for us to do because of our design, because of the brain, right? The left hemisphere versus the right, and, all this either and or. I kind of get to where it meets in the both and.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I just love that I've been open to different experiences. Like right now I'm wearing a mala bead, and it's not a rosary, but they both originated from the same place. They're both tools, right? And it's like being in a playground and saying, this is my toy, not yours.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating to me how many similarities there are in, religions, and even something like a mala bead and a rosary, or, it's like it seems to get pointed out over and over that, like, it's all trying to get us to the same place, which is like to love ourselves and each other and recognize that we have a limited time here, and reconciling that, as far as we know, in the kind of consciousness that we relate to as human beings, we're the only ones that are supposedly consciously aware of our own death, right? So it's almost like, I see how, religion and the origins of all of that going so far back, like it's all to help us feel safe and like we belong, and navigate how precious life is. And then somehow, it's interesting that you said the word gets translated to repent, because I think for me, like one of the hard times I had, kind of wrapping my brain around, and I don't know, I am not a religious scholar at all. In fact, I can hardly remember any of my religious, learning it all. I think it kind of went in one ear and out the other, but it's sort of like the notion that somehow, like we're born, born sinners, or born, into original sin or something like that. And then in my experience of religion was sort of like, well, I spent my whole life then kind of trying to beat myself up and repent and try to make myself good enough in order to fit in, because it always seemed like there was somebody watching me above, like the eyes are always on you kind of stuff. So I love how, in the way you've explored and expanded and have allowed your awareness and fear to come up in kind of challenging some of the notions of religiosity and spirituality that, like, for you, it seems like they didn't have to be mutually exclusive things to be spiritual and to be Catholic. And and to embrace religion and spirituality, not so much as like separate things. But I'm kind of curious, like, so like, how do you relate to it now, like, and your Catholic faith, and also like, do you feel like you said originally too that like you really wanted this kind of sense of belonging? And I'm curious, if you feel that now, if that's just permission you've given to yourself, if people who used to say things about what you were exploring, like have their minds and hearts changed? Like, how has you being you, kind of changed those relationships and your relationship with yourself in the context of your spirituality and faith?
That's such a beautiful question. The first thing that came up is when you asked if it's changed other people's hearts. That's one of the key shifts and transformations that's happened, I think, that has opened up my spiritual eyes, is that I no longer, it sounds ugly to say, but I don't care what they think or say. You know, I have had this sort of falling away of, this is my journey. If it's not yours, okay. Like, I remember a specific conversation with a very, very close loved one who wanted to have an argument with me about something. And I just said, look, if the main teaching of all faiths is exactly what you said, Nancy, love ourselves and love each other, let's talk about the rest of the details once we get that right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was no longer an argument, right? So one, I don't write prescriptions for other people anymore. I write them for myself. And that gave me freedom in and out of spirituality, right? It's like,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, like I can't change somebody's heart, and I don't try anymore. I am who I am, and I do what I do, and if it's for you, awesome. If it's not, change the channel. But so that gave me probably 80% of the freedom. And then the second one is I really, really prayed about it. I was like, dude, you got to give me something. Like, I can't be out here on my own. Like, that's not who I am. So what happened is I came across teachers that are Catholic and that teach this way. And that's honestly what has given me sort of a comfort level with where I am, is that, you find somebody who looks like you or is similar to you. And these two dudes don't look at all like me, right? But one of them is Anthony DeMello, who was an Indian Franciscan priest. And the other one is Richard Rohr, who is I think the terminology is ecumenical, but he's a Catholic priest, right? A Franciscan friar. So one of the things that I connect to with them that I've realized, and I actually recognized it even more in our last conversation, is that they both come from the Franciscan tradition. Like, there's a St. Francis outside my door, and I didn't know like the significance of him being there, but I really feel like he's one of my patron saints because he believes in nature, like in natural. And that's kind of what it felt like when I would go to church as a young girl with my cousin, is like natural, right? We were in our barrio, we didn't have to be accompanied. And I like looked at the Holy Family as part of my family. Like, I walked into church with a childlike belief. And I think even though I lost it for a while, like, that's what's been reopened, is the eyes that I had, before a lot of the conditioning came in, before I would say something would happen, quote unquote, bad. And I'd say, it's because I did something wrong, right? Because I don't see that anymore. I see, for instance, like the rain. The rain is the same. The rain, and I've said this before, the rain is always the same. It's just how you experience it. If it's a drought, you're welcoming it, right? If you're planning an outdoor picnic, you're cursing it. So I think that I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what came up for me.
Yeah, perspective, right? Back to the how the mind how the mind, you know, kind of plays the role in shaping what we want and what kind of outcomes we want to have.
Well, you mentioned something else about that sort of original sin. And this picture just came up in my head, and it's of our brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that the obstacle that we're overcoming is quote unquote original sin, as in the way we've been conditioned to think about
Mm-hmm.
it, but as in our original design, right? Some say that
Mm.
Satan is confusion. So so original sin for me is the nature of my body. Like if I don't integrate the left hemisphere with the right, then I'm only an either or. I'm not an entire holistic. If I don't, experience the world through um my if I only experience it through the logic of my brain and the reasoning and the culture, what the culture wants from me, and I don't really tap into what my body senses, what my gut is telling me, then I'm not whole. And that's
Mm.
for me what sin is this lack of holisticness, this either and or. It's like we've got to bring all of us into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because we're designed to be afraid. We're designed to be scared. Like that's how we survived for millions of years. That's what we're overcoming, right? Is that moving away from our fear instead of moving toward our joy because it's risky, it's scary. We don't, I don't know. That's what's coming up.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting too, because I think with Brene Brown and in the um, who's the shame researcher, and I say that like everyone knows who she is, and I assume they do, but they may not. But the woman researching shame and talking about that and whatever, it kind of makes me think along of the lines of what you're saying too. That really, I mean, it's like um, in order to really live wholly and humanly, that there's no part of us that we can deny. And the way we become separate from ourselves, and kind of exactly what you're saying, it's like I think there's a way in which my experience of religion growing up and why I didn't relate was that like nothing about it felt intuitive or natural or magical or self-empowering, or it was always sort of this stuff outside of me. And so what I felt like was sort of this constant sense of shame, like for having pleasure, bodily desires, all this kind of stuff. And I think um, for me in relating to religion and carrying it forward was a whole lot of like performing good, like
Mm-hmm.
performing as a good person and that kind of stuff as a response to that shame.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those communities then feeling to me sort of like I sort of judged them as hypocritical because I would see everybody there for an hour on Sunday, and then we'd be back in school the other day, and so was being mean to so and so thought they were better than so, and it like I couldn't make sense of it. Like there's a lot of dissonance for me in the way I experienced religion because it seemed to preclude that kind of self-connection and intuition and naturalness and kind of spirituality that you're talking about, and sort of inviting the both and all of it back together in your life, you know.
Yeah. No,
Um,
yeah, yeah. And this is so funny. This is, I think, why I loved our conversation so much. Like a song just came into my head. And the song, I don't know that song's name, but one of the verses is, and they'll know we are Christians by our love.
mm,
So the term Catholic or the term female or the term woman or the term Texas or the
mm-hmm,
term geography, those are just maps, right? They're just,
yeah,
that's not the actual geography. the buildings, they're that's not the actuality of it, I think, is what it's saying for me. Because they'll know you're a Christian because of your love. So it's our lifestyle, it's our experience. And that's why I have just fallen in love with mysticism, because mysticism is about the experiential knowledge, not the knowledge that, like you said, from outside. It's drawing out from within, which is, and I love how everything is coming back to its roots for me. Like Western education, Western schools are raise your hand when you know the answer. Don't raise your hand unless you're sure, right? You're graded against everyone else. That's not true education. Like true education, the original meaning of education is to draw out from within. It's not to take in more, it's to pull out what is within us. So I feel like I just went on a little rant there, but
No,
yeah, I agree with
that's
you.
interesting. Yeah.
I agree with you.
Well, yeah. Well, it's the critical thinking piece, right? Where like when we're not examining our thoughts and how they have come to be in our head, it does and can disconnect us from that love in our heart and coming from that space. And I love that you're talking about like geography and maps and stuff, right? Because like so I was thinking to myself a little bit about this the other day. Like my business name, Goddess of the Road, isn't so much about like me knowing anything about somebody else's life or past, but like kind of understanding that, yeah, like within each of us, we have these human maps to find our way back to love and connection. And it is more about exploring that and how do we do that. And I think exactly what you're saying is true, that like that is completely an inner process and an inner connecting. And that's why I love, practices that enable us to find space for our truth within and allow that to be an evolving process. And without making it seem like the other thing I always kind of react to is this idea that like being, good or loving or whatever is this really like, unicorny, woo, kind of blissed out people and state and I find that like in a lot of your teaching, and I listen to your meditations and all that too, that like, the real felt experience of love is very grounding. And it allows space for so much. Like it can include anger, it can include conflict, like it can include, judgment, jealousy. Like it's like love is holding the space for all of that within us. Like it is the embodiment of our wholeness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Within you. You coined it. You coined it, sister.
well, you know what's interesting? Because I've been that whole idea of what is love has been a big question for me for a long time. But when David and I were going to get married by the church, we went to I guess it's called, I don't know what the real terminology is, but we had to have a certain number of conversations with our priest. And he was awesome because he was just very frank and to the point. And at one point, I won't tell you all he said, but he gave really good advice. But at one point, he said he asked us to define love. And David and I had that whole unicorny, because we were just in love, right? And he said, nope, that's not it. He said, love is labor. Like love is action. Love is commitment. It has nothing to do with your feelings. Because I remember raising my two, they're men now. I always call them boys, but I have to allow them their space, right? I mean, if the idea of love is always that wonderfulness, that, then then I wouldn't have disciplined them, right? I wouldn't have guided them. I wouldn't have, been able to accept their screams with open arms. So I love that you brought it up that way. Because, whew, yeah, that's big.
Well, and so you're going to laugh because so this reminds me of another song. Because you know how cheesy I am. And
Yeah,
it
I
goes
love it.
something like this. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. I don't think it's a hymn or anything, but it makes me laugh.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. Like, a lot of it, I think, is finding balance, right? Like, where we're not being, like, if love is just completely permitting anybody's behavior, that's not, that's probably not going to turn out too well. But, like, as a parent, I mean, you're shaping your children with love to, hopefully allow themselves to show up in the world and be who they are and express themselves and actualize in the ways they want to. And holding that space um, is hard. It really does,
Yeah.
like, mean you have to, it is a lot of action and not so much feeling. It's a lot of, I mean, the feeling is there with it, but, and I think it is all coming from that same space, like, sort of love as divine connection to source and source within and wisdom within and all that, and wanting to guide your children with that,
Mm-hmm.
and allowing for difference and not being authoritarian, but also, like, yeah, just not completely permitting everybody and everything around you, like, and kind of remaining quiet. Um,
Yeah.
Somebody said the other day, like, it's I can't remember where I saw this, but essentially, like, love is boundaries, you know, which I always
Assertive
kind of,
compassion.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
And we do that for ourselves first before we do it for others. I think that's the other thing that I've transitioned um, or transformed is I used to, I guess, work in a way that if I gave it out, then maybe I would get it back.
Yeah.
And I've completely shifted the way that wheel turns.
Mm-hmm.
I give it to myself first, and then it just emanates from me. There's no effort in the giving anymore, where it used to be hard work. But
Yeah.
one of the things that you used a word, you said balance. And I prefer the term harmony.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we've had songs coming up, right?
Yeah.
So harmony, finding our own little jazz ensemble, our own little symphony of our personal rhythm. We each have a different song. So those bars, those notes, they're going to be different for me than they are for you. And that, I think, also folds back into the idea we've been talking about where we can be different. We can distinguish ourselves and be unique without being apart from.
Mm-hmm.
Because uniformity isn't like I can't imagine a garden with only one kind of flower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I that's so true. And I think of well, it's interesting too because I think the way I relate to the word balance is more like harmony. I'm gonna have to
Mm-hmm.
try substituting that word in there because I think of it more like the way the universe is in balance, which is like thousands of things
Oh
acting and reacting, and
yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's kind of like my image of it, which is like, and I love the music metaphor about us and our rhythms too, because it's like there's universes within each of us too, that are complex, that we're constantly negotiating and navigating internally and in reaction to other people. But and yeah, I so agree, and it's been a challenge for me, but I'm learning to lean into it better too, that offering that love and compassion and all that to yourself first is what allows you to allows me to show up the way I want to show up with people versus putting stuff out there and then like, yeah, kind of hoping or using that like as an attempt to control someone, like
Mm-hmm.
where it gets a little like feels more transactional, but unity and uniformity, because you were talking about that when you were talking about how you've influenced or how you've related differently to the people around you who were maybe not so excited about you exploring mysticism or other, vipassana or other things. But like it sounds, like that's a really clear example of how you doing that and being that has brought something back that sort of gets to expand everybody's experience and way of relating to themselves and to their religion and to their faith and to one another. So, it's like there's also kind of a freedom in that. I think that you and the way you've allowed yourself to explore that, like it really is a gift. And people may be into it or not or whatever, but like I think that's pretty intimately connected with love and loving too. Like it becomes a kind of an extension of you and yourself, and an kind of invitation and offering for others too, because you did it in all those explorations for you were done in such an honest, truthful, beautiful, like loving way. In your own inquiry,
I hope so. I don't, and I, but I want to be, I don't feel like I can take credit for it. Like, I skipped a few
Mm.
grades because of the near-death experience, because of the car accident. I
Mm-hmm.
don't,
Mm-hmm.
I think that transformation or that journey could have taken me another 2 decades. I might have been there
Mm.
at, 60 or 80 instead of, 40. But
Yeah.
but the car accident, and the experience that I moved through, there's no way to forget. Like the world was not the same after that. I wasn't the same after that. And so I think it
Yeah.
just pushed fast forward on the truth of everything, you know?
Yeah, which is interesting because as I'm hearing you talk, I see that as like just another form of education that you've been involved in your whole life. Like you know, like it really is like an indoctrination there too, of drawing things out. And yeah, for you, I can totally, um, in the little conversation we've had about that, understand how that was like a real fast forward to learning and understanding stuff that, like you've talked about it before, where like certain things just kind of fell away,
Yeah.
um, in their importance. Not that you haven't had to pay attention to them here and there again, but like um, it almost sounds like it gave you um, like some kind of home of knowledge or base knowledge or understanding that you can return to. And it's kind of part of what you're offering too when you generate all your loving lessons and spaces for holding love and compassion. Like you have a really different felt and understanding and experience of that than a lot of people do.
Thank you. I don't, it's difficult for me to hear that from you because again, I don't want to take credit for it. One of the things that's kind of hard, for folks who don't or aren't intimate with my teachings is like, we're used to getting a curriculum and a book that tells you, every chapter, every paragraph, you know ahead of time kind of what the curriculum is, and I don't know what it is. I just kind of follow my intuition, and it's very much like what you said earlier. It's not a teaching from my head. It's a teaching from my heart. And it gets a little nerve wracking. Like if I've got a class in quotes going on and we're meeting every other week and I haven't gotten the teaching yet. You know? It's like it's like I'm looking at my watch and saying, let's get to it. Come on, I need some info. And that's scary for me and requires a whole lot of love and trust from you or anyone else, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen, but I have never been disappointed. Like there are courses and group sessions where I randomly open a page to a book that I just pick out of my bookshelf by intuition, by instinct. And I hear back and, that was the perfect closing poem, closing paragraph, closing reading, and it landed where it needed to. And having that kind of trust in what will come from within, I don't know how the hell I got it, so I don't want to take credit for it. It's not me. It is the of me allowing it to move through me. And sometimes it dries up, right? Like obstacles come in to play, which are just my thoughts, right? And then I have to patiently wait. And what I don't know, I used it with somebody last week. It might have been you, like you said it to me in a pregnant pause, right?
Yeah.
It's just this it's the darkness of the womb and recognizing it as that darkness of the womb, giving it pause and space enough to be born. It's definitely a skill that society doesn't teach us, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think even in a lot of the, quote unquote creative spaces, I think a lot of that sort of gets co-opted into being more about the result than just the experience. And yeah.
Yeah, I have a new kind of respect or reverence for artists because I really see how they show their heart, bare their soul in their craft. And you and I talked about this last week. Like I was super scared, but really felt called to start a Patreon. And it didn't have to be Patreon, but there was just this I don't even know what to call it. It was a need to create art. And the message that I got, and maybe I translated the message wrong, but that for some, my teachings were landing, it was drip by drip, sort of making a Grand Canyon, right? A new wiring, a new path. But for others, maybe the path is through an expression, right? Through the experience of art, whatever that art is. And now following my heart towards whatever I'm led to create next is just another path to get there. Like it's not always a teaching, not always in a group. And doing that was, I've gone through scary things, but just, I don't know, bearing my soul in that way helped me appreciate what it takes for somebody to do that. And one of my treasured possessions, is the art that you created for me.
Yeah. Well, it's so, thank you for that. I need to learn to just say thank you and take that in.
I'm on the same path.
I'm glad it was meaningful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But it seems to like, and I don't know that we talked about this explicitly, but it seems like a kind of a general conversation that's happening in many different locations, but particularly in like intuitive circles, and that experience of creativity and intuition, is intuition and getting to know yourself in a more intimate way, and bearing your soul to yourself in some ways, depending on sort of how you're relating to it. And that kind of integrity and honesty, I think, is always super empowering, not just for ourselves, but for others. And that can look a whole lot of different ways. But I think at the heart of that, like, is self-trust, right? And that, like, so I went to art school, actually.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm a degreed artist,
What?
whatever that means, which is hilarious to me. But one of the hardest things that I both learned and still kind of attempt to practice, which is also related to what I'm hearing you say too, is this just like finding in ourselves resource and sort of being a resource for ourselves, and like how intuition and creativity sort of naturally fuel that. Because one of the interesting things that we talked about a lot and did in school was that, like, not to be all that precious about anything you create, because once we start to get really precious about what we're making, we get really perfectionist about it, and then it sort of like stifles the process, right? So we do all kinds of things in school where it's like you do it and you throw it away, you do it and you throw it away, because the resource is your connection to the divine muse within. And, and like that's what we're really allowing space for in that creating, is just that welcoming that, and it's so fun when it gets to be turned out into beautiful objects and things. Like I'm so in love with what people make by hand, whether it's pottery or jewelry or, like, it's one of the things that really is a source of inspiration and sort of connection to me, it's a form of human spirituality, a practice to share that. So I think, like, I mean, it is amazing and magical on so many levels. And I think going back to kind of the intuition, that like a lot of what we relate to and we don't realize is just objects and feeling and, like less rational stuff sometimes, so having something made for you and receiving that, like, it is a different way of communicating. And I think it opens up sort of more languages and ways to experience ourselves and others, which ultimately is freeing and loving too,
Yes. Like that's a sacred yes. Like yes with like yes. One of like it's all spirituality. The dancing we do, the laughing we do, the writing we do, the drawing, the gardening, they're all forms of spirituality. The art that we create in the world, that is one of the things that I distinctly like. So words don't ever sort of hit the mark. They're just pointers, right? They just give you like they point towards something. And one of the things that was significant about the NDE, the near death experience, when I felt like, I don't know what happened, but like my soul came out of my body. I was no longer sort of in this form. And I was everywhere. That was the main difference between being alive in this world as a human and where or what I think will happen when I die in this form is that it's like rain, right? How it goes down into the ground, it evaporates, goes into the clouds, and then it comes back down. Like the thing that's distinctive about us on earth right now is that, and Mother Teresa, who's Saint Teresa now, is quoted as saying, I am a tiny pencil in the hand of God. It's our ability to create, into form anything. Words, songs. I'm looking at a stained glass that was created that is, that is spirituality. That is the practice of spirituality. And I love growing up into this recognition of it as that. and
Mm-hmm.
not merely theology, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just had a sadness just sort of drop into me. And I don't know where it's from or what it means, but I think the work that you do and the work that I do and the work that a lot of healers, in whatever form they take, do is alleviating that suffering that we allow ourselves to be in because it's not our true nature.
Mm. Yeah. 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 Well, and one of the things that is so profoundly powerful for me personally as art and relating to art as a spiritual practice is that, if we're humans, having a spiritual experience, it means that, it's not just the quote unquote good stuff that's spiritual. It's the quote unquote bad stuff too. And I find art as an outlet for an expression,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's music or whatever, sort of the most all-encompassing space for that, where like everybody gets to show up in their truth and share and express and and I think, you know, that's a part of that personal but greater healing, like being able to hold space for one another's very real lived experiences of suffering, and also acknowledging that we that this is impermanent, and it's so much of what this is all made up, exactly what you're saying, we made this all up. We made up houses, we made up all these things, and who we are is so much bigger and beyond that and transcends that at the same time. So how do we hold space for walking that line, and reminding ourselves that we are our big self, our biggest self, our star self, the one that's here to shine, 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 and take pleasure, immense pleasure in the ways that we can in our human experience here. That's kind of what divinity wants us to do, in a lot of ways, is be able to just be with the beauty that's here on earth to experience as humans and to engage with. And I feel like I need to remind myself of that all the time,
That
because
sounds almost.
I'm great at being cynical and crabby and, really small and in my, so having all these different ways to be reminded of, I always kind of see it more as blooming, like flowers blooming,
Mm-hmm.
blooming in all these ways to expand and receive and allow more, and, not to negate other challenges or lived realities, because they exist too, but just to learn how to hold them more lightly.
Yeah.
And for me, it's been helpful to channel that into and onto, creative things. Anger makes beautiful music.
Mm-hmm.
It makes, it's all we're meant to experience it all,
Yes.
so. Mm-hmm.
We're meant to experience it all. And you know what? The last minute of what you said, it just felt so true to my heart because for the first few years when the inspiration of Love Being Human happened, I didn't know what it was and I had to study and research it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's as simple as that. It's, the humanity, love being human. This there's a distinct difference between joy and happiness, right? You might not be
Mm-hmm.
happy in the moment, but you can, tap into that deep source of hope, that joy of this breath, you know, this sight, whatever the circumstances are, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's like in activism circles, progressive, these days, it's sort of they're continually reminding to ground into love and joy, because we do more for ourselves and for others from a place of real deep connection to love and joy. The power of that's huge. It's generous. They're very generous forces, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah. I just can say yes. That's all I can say right now.
If something needs to change and you don't quite know what it is yet, tune in and turn inward. I host an online learning community where we can figure it out together. It feels like a little family, and it's a place where you can be supported and offer support, because togetherness sparks change. Visit my digital home at viviancarrasco.com to learn more.